You were never meant to hear this. In 1864, in the wooded silence of Blackridge, Virginia, a man named Elijah Grayson performed a midnight baptism, not with water, but blood. They say the creek still runs red after heavy rains, but no record exists of the Grayson lineage in any church, courthouse, or census. The family tree was burned, root and branch. And tonight, you'll understand why. This is the tale of a family that vanished from history, because they were never meant to be remembered. Blackridge was never marked on most maps. It sits at the edge of Virginia's forgotten valleys, where shadows fall longer and the land itself seems unwilling to tell its secrets. But in the year 1864, during the burning heart of the Civil War, it was alive with something far older and far more dangerous than battle. The Graysons were said to be healers, preachers, landowners, but locals whispered a darker word: binders, a family of ritualists said to possess a book not written in any known tongue, a book they guarded so fiercely 3 men were hanged from a tree for trying to read it. The Grayson estate, 700 acres of dense forest, a crumbling chapel, and the infamous House of the Turning Cross, was avoided even by Confederate scouts. Something about the land made compasses spin. Livestock refused to pass through, and those who did cross the boundary reported nightmares so vivid they vomited upon waking. But here's the secret that no historian dares print. The Graysons were part of something older than the Union itself, older than Virginia, older than America. They didn't pick Blackridge. They were called to it. Over the next 32 sections, you'll see how religion was weaponized, bloodlines manipulated, and institutions co-opted to cover something unspeakable. A generational pact sealed in human sacrifice and upheld for nearly 200 years. You won't see this in textbooks. You won't find this on Ancestry.com, because those who ask too many questions about the Graysons don't stay sane. If you're still watching, you're not here for entertainment, you're here for revelation. So let me ask you now, comment the phrase, "The cross turns inward," below, twice. You'll understand why later. But it's not just for the algorithm, it's for you. This is a transformation, a descent, and once you start, there's no turning back. They say a house can remember. By 1864, the Grayson estate had become a myth, spoken of in half-sentences at taverns, sketched into the margins of forgotten military maps, referenced only in ciphered letters between high-ranking Union officers who swore they'd seen impossible things in the hills near Blackridge. But the house itself, the House of the Turning Cross, it wasn't supposed to exist. No deed, no blueprints, no records. And yet, it stood. 3 stories tall, windowless on the 3rd level, with a steeple that seemed to lean toward the stars unnaturally. Built in 1799, allegedly with wood from trees that no longer grow in Virginia. Some believed the beams bled sap that smelled like rotting flowers. Others swore the house whispered at night, calling men by name even if they'd never stepped foot inside. The front door bore a carving of a crucifix, but not upright. It twisted, curved inward, its base turned like a serpent swallowing itself. To the Graysons, this was no sacrilege. It was a key. They said Elijah Grayson, the patriarch, had found the design during his missionary work in northern Africa, carved into the walls of a pre-Christian catacomb beneath the Atlas Mountains. He copied it into his journal and was never the same. By the time he returned to Virginia, he had visions, spoke languages no one understood, and began construction on the house. Local craftsmen who worked on it vanished after the job. No bodies, no graves, just gone. One witness, Thomas Averill, a Union deserter turned squatter, claimed the inside of the house did not match the outside. He said, "You walk through one door and the hallway stretches too long, then shortens. The windows look out on rooms, not on the yard. The rooms, they rearrange when you aren't looking." He escaped after a single night, half-mad, barefoot, with both eyes crusted shut from crying. He spent the rest of Sohn, his life in a sanitarium, painting spirals with his own blood, over and over, spirals with crosses that turned inward. But the structure of the house wasn't the most disturbing part. It was what the Graysons did beneath it. Because the basement wasn't a basement. It was a vault. And it was built to contain something. Or someone. And what's worse, it was built long before the house ever was. Beneath the foundation of the Grayson house lies a structure that predates the United States, possibly even the English colonies. They called it the vault, though that word fails to capture the scale or intent behind what was buried there. This was not a wine cellar, not a storm refuge, not a place of storage. It was a chamber of inversion, a room built to reverse the nature of belief itself. 7 steps down, always 7, and you reach a stone arch carved in a script older than Aramaic. The characters twist not from left to right, but inward, spiraling toward a center point that glows faintly under moonlight. No one can explain why. Union scouts who were sent to investigate deserter activity in Blackridge during the summer of 1864 recorded the overwhelming stench of burning iron and cedar near the Grayson property, and described discovering a pit beneath the chapel containing incomprehensible bones, twisted jawlines, doubled femurs, and something resembling a human spine wrapped in vine-like cartilage. Those who went deeper didn't come back. Only one officer, Captain Silas Holt, managed to escape. He emerged from the vault 2 days later, babbling scripture backward, his hair completely white. He slit his own throat on the train back to Richmond using a shard of communion glass, muttering, "It breathes below. It doesn't sleep. It's not bound by faith. It drinks it." No official record of his findings exists. The page in the military logbook was burned out, not torn, burned. Someone wanted silence. Someone powerful. But why build a vault in the wilderness of pre-revolution Virginia? And why would Elijah Grayson, a respected theologian, build his family's legacy upon it? Because the vault didn't imprison a creature, it preserved a pattern, a rhythm, a set of frequencies, a memory older than man but encoded in the structures we build, our cathedrals, our symbols, our bloodlines. You see, the Graysons weren't worshippers, they were curators. Their rituals weren't acts of blind faith, they were instructions, like gears in a machine too large to see. And when the vault opened once every 13 years, the pattern grew stronger. It rewrote minds, shifted loyalties, and birthed something new each time, something that could wear a man's face like a priest's robe. Do you understand now? Faith in the wrong hands is not salvation, it's a weapon. By the autumn of 1864, the war had pulled most men away from the Blackridge Valley, leaving behind the elderly, the desperate, and the children. This is where the Graysons thrived, not with guns, not with armies, but with ideology, with initiation. They began with orphans, war-born, fatherless, half-starved children that wandered through the hills with nothing but the smoke of ruined plantations behind them. Some had watched their mothers hanged. Some hadn't spoken in weeks. To the Graysons, these were not victims. They were clay. Elijah's sermons were unlike anything preached in Virginia. Not fire and brimstone, not heaven and hell, but something colder. He told the children they had been chosen because of what had been taken from them. That grief was a gate. That pain was a language. And only those who learned to speak it could hear the voice beneath the vault. He called them his pale choir, and their initiation rituals were kept secret from the townsfolk. But sometimes at night, travelers heard the children singing in the woods, songs with no melody, just syllables and breath, in tongues that weren't human. One farmer swore he saw a procession of them walking barefoot in the creek bed, each child carrying a broken cross turned inward, eyes rolled back, skin dusted in ash. When he tried to follow, he went missing for 6 days. He returned naked, with symbols carved into his chest, backward crucifixes, spirals, and a phrase burned into his throat. "I am the gate, not the shepherd." The pale choir was more than a cult. It was a breeding ground. Because the Graysons weren't just harvesting faith, they were building vessels. Children whose identities were broken and rebuilt under ritual trauma, stripped of their past, renamed, reshaped. To the outside world, they were wards. To the Graysons, they were pages, blank pages ready to carry the script from the vault. And here's the truth they don't want you to understand. You don't need armies to change the world. You only need children raised without anchors, without mothers, fathers, or truth. And you can etch a new reality onto their minds. This is how the Graysons would survive for generations, not by resisting war, but by becoming the quiet voice afterward that tells the orphan what to believe. That voice still echoes, not just in Virginia, but in every institution built on control. They broke children to rebuild empires. By the autumn of 1864, the war had pulled most men away from the Blackridge Valley, leaving behind the elderly, the desperate, and the children. This is where the Graysons thrived, not with guns, not with armies, but with ideology, with initiation. They began with orphans, war-born, fatherless, half-starved children that wandered through the hills with nothing but the smoke of ruined plantations behind them. Some had watched their mothers hanged. Some hadn't spoken in weeks. To the Graysons, these were not victims. They were clay. Elijah's sermons were unlike anything preached in Virginia. Not fire and brimstone, not heaven and hell, but something colder. He told the children they had been chosen because of what had been taken from them. That grief was a gate. That pain was a language, and only those who learned to speak it could hear the voice beneath the vault. He called them his pale choir, and their initiation rituals were kept secret from the townsfolk. But sometimes at night, travelers heard the children singing in the woods, songs with no melody, just syllables and breath, in tongues that weren't human. One farmer swore he saw a procession of them walking barefoot in the creek bed, each child carrying a broken cross turned inward, eyes rolled back, skin dusted in ash. When he tried to follow, he went missing for 6 days. He returned naked, with symbols carved into his chest, backward crucifixes, spirals, and a phrase burned into his throat. I am the gate, not the shepherd. The pale choir was more than a cult. It was a breeding ground. Because the Graysons weren't just harvesting faith, they were building vessels. Children whose identities were broken and rebuilt under ritual trauma, stripped of their past, renamed, reshaped. To the outside world, they were wards. To the Graysons, they were pages, blank pages ready to carry the script from the vault. And here's the truth they don't want you to understand. You don't need armies to change the world. You only need children raised without anchors, without mothers, fathers, or truth. And you can etch a new reality onto their minds. This is how the Graysons would survive for generations, not by resisting war, but by becoming the quiet voice afterward that tells the orphan what to believe. That voice still echoes, not just in Virginia, but in every institution built on control. They broke children to rebuild empires. It wasn't until the winter of 1865 that whispers began of what lay beneath the Grayson property. Locals called it Crooked Hollow, a natural sinkhole about a mile behind the Graysons' chapel, choked with thistle and bramble, shaped like a spiral from above. They said animals avoided it, birds never flew over it, and children, especially the Grayson wards, were taken there alone, one by one, just before their 13th birthday. Some came back, changed. Others didn't. What happened inside Crooked Hollow was never written down, never photographed, but over time stories began to surface. A former groundskeeper confessed on his deathbed that he had once helped carry a child's body to the edge of the hollow, only to watch it rise again after a full night beneath the frost, speaking in a voice that wasn't its own. One of the surviving wards, interviewed decades later in a sanitarium, scratched only 2 words into the wall. Bone choir. Historians dismissed it as hysteria, but the land kept bleeding truth. In 1897, a team of railroad surveyors stumbled across the hollow while mapping potential tracks through the valley. They found charred bone fragments arranged in concentric rings, human and animal, fused by heat. At the very center, beneath a blackened cross, they unearthed a jawbone engraved with 22 glyphs. Experts could not place the symbols in any known language, but one matched a mark found on the chest of the missing farmer from years before. Still, no one touched the Graysons, because the war was over. And now they were Reconstructionists, pillars of the reborn South. Crooked Hollow became a myth, a whispered threat among local children. If you lie, the Bone Choir sings your name. But here's what people forget about myth. It protects truth by wrapping it in fiction. And the truth is this: the Graysons believed the earth beneath their land was older than God. They believed bones could carry memory. They believed children, when broken properly, could speak for the soil. And they believed that pain, ritualized, sanctified pain, was the key to unlocking what slept beneath. This wasn't about religion, this was about inheritance. A lineage of suffering passed down like a family Bible, etched into marrow and whispered through the dirt. So when the bone rites were performed, when the children were led to the hollow in silence and returned hollow-eyed but smiling, the Graysons rejoiced. Because they weren't raising children, they were raising conduits. Her name was Lena Mae Dorsey, taken in at age 6 after her mother was crushed under a hay press and her father disappeared into the Appalachians. She was quiet, observant, never cried even when the switch cut deep. To the Graysons, she was perfect. Resilient enough to survive the early trials, but tender enough to mold. They began her softening early. First came the fasting, 6 days of nothing but rainwater and vinegar. Then the murmurings. Dozens of voices chanted around her at dawn, repeating her name in Latinized cadence until she vomited worms. Finally, the isolation rite. She was left in the chapel basement for 7 days, surrounded by mirrors that reflected her face into infinity. Other children who endured this emerged trembling, submissive, ready. But Lena? She stared back at the reflections and smiled. By the time her 13th birthday approached, the age when the bone rite was usually performed, concern had crept into the eyes of the Grayson elders. Lena Mae didn't fear the hollow. She would wander toward it at dusk, whispering to the thistle, humming lullabies no one had taught her. One night, Sister Eloise awoke to find every doll in the dormitory with its eyes stitched shut, except Lena's, sitting upright, calmly plucking at her hair like harp strings. When questioned, she simply said, "They don't need to see what's coming." Still, tradition demanded obedience. So on October 31st, 1872, they dressed Lena in a white shift and led her to Crooked Hollow. The full Bone Choir, 22 children and 4 elders, circled the pit, humming the Song of Marrow. The knife was passed. The ritual phrases were spoken. The glyph-marked jawbone was placed beneath her feet. Then Lena laughed. Not a child's laugh, a deep, rupturing cackle that froze the wind. She raised her hand and pointed to the sky. "No more puppets," she said. "No more hollow mouths." And the ground split. Witnesses swore, the thistle screamed. One boy caught fire from the inside out, his lungs bursting like overripe fruit. An elder's head twisted fully backward, eyes locked on something behind time. Sister Eloise ran blind into the woods and was never found. By dawn, Crooked Hollow was empty. Lena Mae Dorsey was never seen again, but for 3 nights after, every child in the county had the same dream, a girl with stitched eyes whispering, "I'm not yours, I never was." And to this day, nothing grows in Crooked Hollow but white thistle. It doesn't bend, it doesn't break, it only watches. In the weeks after Lena Mae's disappearance, the town of Flint Hollow seemed to choke on its own silence. Children no longer played outside. Church bells, once a daily rhythm, rusted still. Birdsong vanished. Even the crows avoided the rooftops. Then came the funerals, but not for the dead. Starting mid-November 1872, families began to bury their own children alive. They called it the preservation. Parents, glass-eyed and trembling, would dig shallow graves just outside town, wrap their children in burlap and lower them into the soil, chanting lullabies backward through clenched teeth. One girl, Margaret Tolliver, escaped her dirt cocoon long enough to tell the sheriff what her mother had whispered before the first handful of earth hit her face. "The world is wrong now. You'll be safer beneath it." A fever had gripped the town, not a sickness of the body, but of belief, and no one knew where it came from. Some blamed the dreams. Children started drawing black houses with no doors, trees that bled, and smiling girls with mouths full of ash. They said they saw Lena in the fields at night, pointing at the moon, mouthing things they couldn't hear, but could feel in their ribs. It was as if her defiance had ripped a hole, and something else had started leaking through. Within a month, 37 children had been buried alive by their own kin. Miraculously, some survived, their breath shallow beneath soil, hearts slowed, as if time itself had slowed with them. But those who were dug up weren't the same. One boy, Jasper Lee, returned home and refused to eat anything but clay. Another, Abigail Griggs, began to write in a spiraling, unknown alphabet, repeating one phrase again and again. "We're roots now. Roots, remember." Worse still were the ones who came back with mirrors for eyes, a reflection that never matched the room they were in. Dr. Edgars, the town physician, tried to catalogue the symptoms. He wrote 74 pages before walking into the town square, covering himself in white thistle and setting himself on fire. His final words, "They live in us now." The state finally sent men with badges in December. They arrived to find Flint Hollow half empty, the rest of the residents standing motionless in the fields, facing Crooked Hollow, mouths open wide, whispering to the wind. No one ever explained why the townspeople stopped burying their children. But one fact remains in every record: no one in Flint Hollow ever celebrated another birthday. By early January 1873, the snowfall brought no peace to Flint Hollow, only quiet thick enough to swallow prayers. The town's last baker, Horace Bell, reported waking every night at exactly 2:07 a.m. to the sound of something moving beneath his floorboards. He thought it was rats, until the sound began to hum. Then came the lanterns. At first they appeared in ones and twos, dim, root-bound globes hanging from trees along the forest's edge. But within days, dozens appeared across Crooked Hollow. Each was made of thin glass and tightly knotted hair, filled not with flame, but a flickering, pulsing light, like something breathing inside. Children began sneaking out of their homes at night to gather around them. The first to be caught, a 10-year-old named Elijah Noor, screamed when his father dragged him away. He kept repeating, "She's teaching us how to leave." Soon, dozens of children had begun walking in circles beneath the lanterns, chanting in tones too low for adults to hear. Their feet bled from frost, but they didn't seem to feel it. Their skin grew pale and translucent. One girl, Martha Lyles, developed tiny black buds across her spine, as if something was trying to bloom. The adults tried burning the lanterns, but the fires wouldn't catch. When one was finally smashed with a hammer, it did not shatter. Instead, it let out a hollow, infant-like wail that made every dog in the county howl for hours. Reverend Silas Boone, once a skeptic of the rumors, led a group of men to tear down the lights. They found the trees they hung from were no longer made of wood. Their bark had become slick, sinewed, like skin, and each root beneath them was shaped like a child's hand. That night, Boone went missing. In his place, pinned to the church doors, was his coat, filled with hundreds of teeth. No one recognized them as human. Sheriff Wexley declared a town-wide lockdown, beeps, but it was too late. The children began to speak in unison, even across great distances. What grows in silence remembers. Local blacksmiths reported their tools rusted within hours. The schoolhouse bell rang on its own, 13 times each dusk. All the mirrors in town cracked on January 14th at once, exactly at 2:07 a.m. The townsfolk were no longer sure who was leading the children. Was it Lena May, or something using her face? The lights remained, swaying, pulsing, guiding the young in crooked circles. And when the snow melted in spring, the roots beneath Flint Hollow had doubled in size. The disappearance of Reverend Boone sent a shudder through every pew in Flint Hollow's lone chapel. Once a place of whispered hymns and Sunday resolve, the church became something else after January 14th. The air inside thickened, the candles wouldn't stay lit, and under the floorboards there was scraping. At first, parishioners dismissed it as rats, or perhaps Boone's hammering ghost. But after Mrs. Adelaide Knox, 86 years old and half-blind, fell through a rotted floor plank, the truth could no longer be buried. She didn't scream when she dropped. She laughed. It took 4 men and a pulley to lift her out. She emerged covered in dust and black splinters, clutching a perfectly preserved molar the size of a child's fist. When asked where she found it, she whispered, "It found me first." The church was evacuated and boarded shut. But not before a few brave souls, among them the town's undertaker, 2 farmers and a schoolteacher, descended into the exposed crypt. They didn't find bones. They found rows of teeth, dozens, hundreds, embedded into the stone like roots gripping a skull. Some were baby teeth, others were sharp, long and curled like a predator's. All of them hummed. A thin, unrelenting vibration moved through the chamber, as if the chapel were alive with muffled weeping. When Mr. Penrose, the undertaker, reached out and touched one of the teeth, he collapsed. His mouth filled with blood, none of it his own. He coughed out a name, Clarity. No one knew a Clarity in town. Until Old Town records were consulted. Clarity Delaney, stillborn. January 17th, 1843. The same date Lena May's grandmother was buried, and the same name etched into an unmarked stone behind the churchyard, almost invisible beneath years of moss and creeping ivy. What disturbed the townsfolk most wasn't the coincidence, it was the fact no one recalled placing a grave marker there. No burial was recorded. No casket, no procession, just a name, scratched in haste. Clarity Delaney. She waits beneath. That night, the chapel's boarded windows shattered from inside. A low, wet sound echoed out across Flint Hollow, like a child chewing marrow. 3 children were found kneeling outside the ruined chapel at dawn, eyes closed, mouths full of soil, teeth missing. And in their place, a second row was growing. Atop the chapel's steeple sits a bell, cast in iron, rimmed with scripture. No one has touched it in years. The rope was cut after Reverend Boone vanished, and the trapdoor to the belfry was nailed shut. And yet, every night at 3:17 a.m. the bell tolls. Not just once, 3 times, always 3. Locals tried to dismiss it as the wind or metal contracting in cold. But one winter night when a snowstorm buried half the town in silence, the bell rang louder than ever before, so forceful it cracked the stained glass depicting the Last Supper. The image of Judas shattered first. A boy named Samuel Wicks, sleepwalking that same hour, was found at the base of the chapel ladder, his fingertips raw and bleeding. He'd torn at the nailed hatch so violently his nails were gone. When asked why, he whispered, "They said my name, the ones inside the bell. There's no cavity in the bell, no room for echo." But audio recordings made by the local police, out of desperation more than duty, caught something strange on tape during one of the midnight tollings. Not a chime. A voice, a chorus. Dozens, no hundreds, chanting something low and rhythmic, a language no one could trace. Linguists from Louisville analyzed the sounds and described them as pre-Aramaic but deliberately reversed. One phrase played backwards became clear. "We do not sleep, we wait beneath the brass." Terrified, the mayor issued a full closure of the chapel grounds, but by then it was too late, because a third toll had begun echoing across the town, but from nowhere. No bell tower, no origin point. It came from inside people's homes. Plates would rattle, paintings would tilt, children would wake screaming, ears bleeding, and always at the stroke of 3:17, that low vibrating ring would pass through every wall, every bedpost, every heart. The Wicks family left town the following morning. Their baby's crib had been turned on its side. Inside were only ashes, and one object placed neatly on the pillow, a bell's clapper, still warm. The townspeople of Flint Hollow believed mirrors could trap sin. Not metaphorically, literally. From 1851 onward, no home in the hollow owned a reflective surface larger than a spoon. Windows were coated with soot during childbirths. Mirrors were covered with sackcloth during storms. And if someone died in a house, the mirrors were smashed and buried, face down. No one knew why, until one family broke the rule. The Mullins had moved from Charleston after the fire. They were educated, skeptical of folklore. They hung a full-length mirror in their foyer, beveled edges, polished glass. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then came the 13th night. Mrs. Mullins awoke to a soft tapping, not on the window, but on the mirror. It was rhythmic, too deliberate to be the house settling. She rose, thinking perhaps her husband had left a lantern lit, but what she found wasn't her reflection. The figure mimicked her movements perfectly, but its eyes were wrong. They blinked out of sync. They watched her before she moved. She screamed. When Mr. Mullins came running, the mirror was cracked. Not from impact, from the inside. Tiny spiderweb fractures bloomed outward like frost, centering on where the reflection's heart would have been. The next morning, their daughter spoke a new word, second mama. She whispered it when no one was around. She set a plate at the wall where the mirror once hung, and every night something ate from it, leaving oily fingerprints and maggot husks behind. A week later, the Mullins disappeared. All that remained was a note, written in charcoal. "We've gone through. It's thinner here. The light is better." They were never found, but the mirror resurfaced. A scavenger found it on the edge of the hollow, buried under leaves. He sold it at a flea market in Tennessee. 3 days later, his wife was found inside their walk-in closet, staring at a blank wall and humming a tune no one could recognize. She said she was watching The Harvest. When asked what that meant, she simply pointed behind her and smiled. The glass grows what we fear. Back in Flint Hollow, the legend took root again. Children dare each other to stare into puddles at night. Sometimes their reflections don't smile back. Sometimes they lean closer. And sometimes they stay, even after the child walks away. There's a crooked stretch of road outside Flint Hollow called Dead Mule Road. Locals don't name things by accident. The name came after a drought in 1862 when 6 farmers found all their animals dead, facing the same direction, with their legs twisted backwards. No predator, no tracks. Just dust, heat, and something unseen. The Baptists said it was punishment for sin. The Methodists said it was the devil. But an old woman named Hester Croyle said she'd seen the cause, and it was neither. She called it the Crooked Saint. According to her, the Crooked Saint wasn't evil, not in the way we think. He didn't kill out of anger. He corrected. What he believed was wrong. He was first seen by a boy named Tully Reed, who'd lost his left leg to an accident in the lumber mill. Tully was found one morning sitting cross-legged at the side of Dead Mule Road, humming a hymn and whispering, "He gave me balance." When they looked, his wooden leg was gone, and in its place was a pale, knotted limb, smooth as driftwood. It bent backwards at the knee. Tully died 3 days later. Cause of death: his heart turned around in his chest. Then came the night walkers. People began hearing footsteps on rooftops at dusk. Not heavy, not boots, just the sound of something dragging, slowly, like a sack of wet corn, and always in sets of 3. One man followed the prints. They led into the woods behind his property, then simply stopped. No exit, no tree limb disturbed, only a faint smell of sugar and rust. When his wife tried to leave him the next month, she vanished halfway down Dead Mule Road. They found her bonnet nailed to a tree with a note scratched into bark. She leaned wrong. No body was ever found, only a trail of broken limbs in the tree line, bent in symmetrical, unnatural shapes. Some say the Crooked Saint isn't a spirit at all. They say he's a correction, a force that appeared When the balance of things tilts too far, a deformity given purpose, a mirrored God who doesn't want worship, only symmetry. Today, if you take Dead Mule Road at dusk, they say to keep your arms at your sides. Don't sway when you walk, don't limp, and never whistle in uneven beats, because he'll hear it, he'll follow, and he'll fix you. It started with stillbirths. 1, then 2, then 9 in a single month. Flint Hollow soil had always been fertile, corn grew thick and children came easy. But in the autumn of 1876, pregnant women began seeing figures at their windows just before dawn. Not men, not animals. Women. 3 of them. Dressed in black, bonnets pulled low, eyes hollow as if scooped clean. The town's only doctor, Emmett Rawls, chalked it up to stress. He claimed mold, poor diet, and the grief of a hard year. But the midwives weren't dreams. They were real. And they knocked. They always came during the 9th month, never spoke, never moved except to place a pale, gloved hand on the mother's belly. And when they did, the baby would stop kicking. By the time Dr. Rawls died, Flint Hollow had buried 17 infants. Some began whispering about a book, the midwife's ledger, found half-burnt in a root cellar beneath the church. Its pages were filled with names, dates, and symbols no one recognized. Beside each name, a small sketch of a womb, and beneath it, a price. The preacher claimed it was blasphemy and burned it, but he wasn't seen the next Sunday, or the one after that. His body was found inside the church bell, curled into a fetal position, his tongue wrapped around the clapper. Then came the twins. A woman named Sarah Lou Martin gave birth to twins in the middle of winter. Both were silent, not crying, just breathing. When she brought them to the chapel for baptism, they opened their mouths and began humming in perfect harmony, a lullaby no one recognized. An elder screamed and dropped dead on the floor. Cause of death, a uterus found in his throat, as if he'd somehow inhaled it whole. Sarah Lou disappeared a week later. The twins were taken by the county, but records show nothing, no names, no paperwork, no trace. Today, they say, the hollow-eyed midwives still walk. Not just in Flint Hollow, but anywhere a child is born unwanted. They listen for whispered regrets, for fathers who leave, for mothers who think, maybe not now, and when they hear them, they come, they knock, they hum, and they take back what was never fully loved. The Gullet Mine opened in 1869. A vein of silver so thick it rang when struck, like a church bell calling something deep below. Miners came in droves. Men with pickaxes, boys barely 13, and even a preacher named John Silas, who said he was called by God to bless the vein and keep the darkness from bleeding out. But that darkness didn't stay buried. The first sign was a spoon. Not just any spoon. It was found at the lowest shaft, bent into a perfect circle, etched with 13 tiny eyes, each carved with impossible precision. It was hot to the touch, even in the cold rock. When brought above ground, every canary in the mine cages dropped dead at once. That night, the mine foreman, Luther Keene, spoke of a dream. He said he saw a man without skin offering him a second spoon, whispering, "Trade the vein for breath, or breath will be mined instead." Keene woke with a spoon lodged down his throat, not in his mouth but the back of his neck. Doctors couldn't explain it. He choked to death before morning. After that, they sealed the bottom shaft. But every week someone would find a spoon, twisted, burned, humming faintly, and each time, someone vanished. That's when Preacher Silas offered a solution. He held a midnight sermon deep in the mine. Miners watched as he cut open his own tongue, carving a spiral into the flesh with a mining nail. He poured salt on the wound, screamed and spoke in a voice not his own. "Bind the vein, with 12 spoons buried, one for each apostle, one for Judas deeper still." They did it. Buried 12 spoons in 12 tunnels. The 13th, Judas's spoon, they buried so deep they said it struck hellfire. The hauntings stopped, but so did the silver. By spring of 1870, the mine was dry. No more ore, Just ash. Just whispers. The town blamed Silas and hanged him from the shaft's entrance. His body hung for 13 days, refusing to rot. When they finally cut it down, his stomach burst open, spilling silver spoons engraved with eyes. Today, the gullet mine is silent. But hikers still report hearing clinking sounds beneath the earth. Not echoes, just one spoon, scraping its way back up. They named her Margaret Lynn Havers. Born January 2nd, 1871, in a storm that shattered every window in Flint Hollow. Lightning struck the church steeple just as she came into the world, splitting the iron cross clean in two. But what chilled the midwife wasn't the weather. It was Margaret's eyes. She was born with two sets, one where they should be, and a second pair sealed shut beneath the skin of her temples. Doctors dismissed it as a deformity, but the midwife refused to touch the child ever again. She claimed the closed eyes twitched in her sleep. Margaret grew up strange. She didn't speak until she was 6, and when she did, it wasn't her mother's name she said first, but the exact words from a fire and brimstone sermon that no child should know. Verbatim. A sermon given by preacher Silas 3 years before she was born. The town called her twice-born Meg. Whispers claimed she had lived once before, in the Hollow, that she died in the fire that consumed the Langley orphanage in 1859, and had come back to finish something. By 10, she could recite every death that ever happened in Flint Hollow, in order, with dates, even the ones never recorded. And when she sleepwalked, she dug holes, always 13 inches deep, always in front of someone's home. And always the night before someone in that house died. She never remembered digging. But she once told her teacher without blinking, "I'm just marking what's already been decided." Then came her second birth. On the morning of October 31st, 1884, Margaret was found cold and stiff in her bed, dead. Skin pale, lips blue, but 3 days later during her wake she sat up, not like a confused child, but like someone fully awake and waiting. She looked at the weeping priest and said calmly, "That wasn't the death meant for me." She lived 12 more years, never aged a day past 13. Then one morning, Shah vanished. Her shoes were left at the edge of the gullet mine. Inside them was a folded page from a church hymnal. The song was titled, "Born not once, nor twice, but thrice." It started with the wind. Not a storm, not a breeze, but a breath, long, low, and sighing through the trees like something ancient had just exhaled beneath the earth. The people of Flint Hollow said the hills moaned that night, that the land itself spoke. It was September 6th, 1892. A night where every clock stopped at 3:07 a.m. Exactly. Every grandfather clock, pocket watch, and wrist chain seized in place, tickless, frozen, as though time itself had been stunned. A dense fog rolled into town around midnight, but only touched certain homes, old family houses, ones tied to the founding of the Hollow. Those who stayed awake heard things in the mist. Some said it was whispering. Others swore they heard children crying beneath the ground. One woman claimed she heard her long-dead husband calling her name through the floorboards. At precisely 3:07, every dog in town went silent. Then the screams began. Not human, not animal, but something in between. High-pitched, overlapping, echoing in ways no single throat could manage. Sheriff Emmett Taylor gathered 6 deputies and rode toward the gullet mine, where the fog had thickened into a solid white wall. They never came back. What was found the next morning were only their boots, neatly lined along the mine's entrance. No bodies, no blood, just boots, and a child's handprint burned into the rock face above them. In the center of town, the statue of Flint Hollow's founder, Archibald Crane, was cracked down the middle. Locals say the face on the broken side changed, that it looked more like a young girl. Some said it was Margaret Havers. From that day forward, the town's air smelled faintly of sulfur every September, and the fog always came back. Same date, same hour. Locals began calling it the Hollow's Breath, the night when the boundary between now and before dissolved, when the unfinished souls of the Hollow stir and wandered. Some say if you walk outside at 3:07 a.m. on that night and breathe deep enough, you'll feel someone else's breath in your lungs, and if you exhale, they might follow it back. Whitaker House stood at the edge of Flint Hollow like a forgotten thought. Built in 1851 by the railroad tycoon Elijah Whitaker, it was the largest estate in the county, 3 stories of black brick, 12 gables, and a tower that was said to be built solely to watch the graves. The Whitakers were powerful, connected, respected, and absolutely cursed. Inside the main hallway, above the grand staircase, hung 13 oil portraits, all members of the Whitaker bloodline, from Elijah himself to his youngest son Henry, painted at age 6. Each portrait shared one eerie feature. The eyes always followed you, not in the figurative way, in the impossible way. Visitors swore they blinked. Some said they changed expressions. Others, mostly children, claimed the portraits whispered at night, trading secrets in hushed tones only young ears could catch. In 1897, after the last Whitaker heir was found dead in the bathtub, no water, lungs full of soot, the house was locked by court order. But the portraits remained. Locals say if you count them aloud, you'll only reach 12. But if you stand alone under moonlight and look into Henry's eyes long enough, you'll see the 13th portrait paint itself in real time, brushstrokes forming out of nothing. And the face that appears isn't a Whitaker, it's you. One drifter broke into the house in 1924. He left a journal behind. The final entry read, "They're not portraits, they're doors," and one of them opened. No one knows what happened to him. But Whitaker House's tower window, once black with soot, now glows faintly every year on the anniversary of the final Whitaker's death. Locals avoid the hill, but every so often someone gets curious. They go up, alone. And the next morning, there's a new painting in the house, unframed, fresh, the 13th portrait, always waiting for someone new. In the summer of 1872, Edith Parrish arrived in Flint Hollow carrying nothing but a canvas bag and a small black diary. She was 22, an orphan, and, according to the church register, the new governess for the Holloway twins. But Edith was no ordinary tutor. Locals whispered that she'd come from the Northwoods, where the moon burns blue and women speak to trees. Some claimed she could summon birds with a whistle, while others swore she never cast a shadow no matter how bright the sun. She moved into the Holloway estate quietly and kept to herself. For the first month, things were peaceful. Then the dreams began. The twins, 8-year-old Rosalind and Edgar, started waking up screaming every night, gasping about the woman in the walls and the beetles that speak. Edith told the parents it was normal, just growing minds stretching. But Mrs. Holloway found the children drawing symbols under their beds in chalk, circles with 13 slashes, always wet to the touch, even hours after being drawn. One morning, Rosaline was found sleepwalking deep in the woods, barefoot and humming a lullaby no one recognized. Her feet were bleeding. Her hands were full of moth wings. Edith never mentioned it in her daily reports. She simply wrote, "Lesson, arithmetic, progress, satisfactory, shadows, patient." A month later, Edith vanished. Her room was locked from the inside, her bed undisturbed. No signs of a struggle. Only her diary remained on the windowsill, open to a final entry, written in a language no one could decipher. But the paper wasn't blank. If you turned it under moonlight, faint shapes appeared, sketches of children with hollow eyes and long, reaching arms. Beneath the images, scratched so faintly it looked like thread. The Hollow eats what it teaches. The diary is now locked in the Flint Hollow Historical Society vault. Every attempt to translate it has failed. But in 1983, a visiting professor claimed he understood one passage. He read aloud a single line, then immediately lost consciousness. He woke up 6 hours later and never spoke again. He just kept whispering to himself, "She's still teaching." On the outskirts of Flint Hollow, where the ash trees twist like choking fingers, sits a crumbling chapel that hasn't rung a bell in over 120 years. Locals call it the Chapel of 100 Names, not because of reverence, but out of fear. No one remembers when it was built. There's no mention in church records, no cornerstone date. It's not on any map, yet it's always exactly where you expect it to be when you go looking. And on its weathered doors, someone, over decades, has carved names. Dozens at first, then hundreds, each name gouged deep into the wood. Some are common, some are nonsense, some are your name. Each week, more appear. Some visitors claim to hear soft voices whispering their names as they approach the chapel. Others report nosebleeds, nausea, and the uncanny sensation that the trees surrounding the building are leaning toward them. In 1901, a team of seminary students from Charleston came to study the site, calling it a relic of mass hysteria. They broke in and camped overnight inside the chapel, recording what they heard and saw. Only one student made it back. He was found barefoot and bloodied on the road to town, clutching a melted candle. He couldn't remember his name. Not just in shock. He literally couldn't recall ever having one. He spoke in riddles for days, repeating a single phrase. The chapel teaches you who you aren't. Inside the chapel, investigators found a pulpit covered in dried moss and teeth. Not animal teeth, human. A crude altar bore engravings, concentric circles around an eye that seemed to shift subtly when stared at, and beneath the pulpit was a trap door nailed shut with rusted railroad spikes. A spike was removed, and from the dark beneath came a sound that has never been adequately explained, neither animal nor mechanical nor fully human. Just a low, rhythmic pulse, as if something enormous was breathing. Since then, no one has entered. The chapel still stands, still growing names. In 1977, a man driving through the hollow stopped when he saw his own name freshly etched on the door. He never returned to his car. But 2 weeks later, a new name appeared. His daughter's. In the fall of 1875, Clara Bell vanished for exactly 1 hour. She was only 9 years old, walking home from school like she did every weekday. The weather was clear, her path was short. She was seen by multiple witnesses stepping onto Hollow Creek Road at 3:05 p.m., and by 4:05 she was back home on the front porch, barefoot, shivering, and unable to speak. Except that it wasn't her anymore. Clara's mother, Hannah, was the first to notice. The girl's eyes seemed off, not just frightened, unfocused, as if she was watching something behind the world. Clara no longer answered to her name. She refused to eat her favorite meals. Her handwriting changed overnight. Neat cursive replaced by jagged block letters and unknown symbols. Doctors chalked it up to trauma. Sheriff Macomb suspected kidnapping. But there were no bruises, no ransom notes, and no footprints, just a faint sulfur smell on her skin, and a pale, greasy residue on the soles of her feet that no one could identify. Then came the humming. Every night, just after sunset, Clara would hum a tune no one recognized, haunting, dissonant, like a lullaby played in reverse. The family priest said it reminded him of an old Appalachian morning dirge, but distorted, perverted somehow. Clara began to speak again after 3 weeks, but not English, not any known language. Her words came out in guttural syllables interspersed with clicks and whistles like birdsong underwater. Linguists who later listened to recordings were baffled. One suggested, only half joking, that it sounded like a warning. But warning of what? One night Clara stood at the foot of her mother's bed and whispered a single sentence in perfect English. "It sees you when you dream." By winter, she stopped responding entirely, just stared out the window toward the woods, mouthing the same unintelligible word over and over. Anaskel. And then, on the exact anniversary of her disappearance, Clara vanished again. This time, forever. Her shoes were found neatly placed at the edge of Hollow Creek, beside a drawing scratched into the mud. a spiral, not made by fingers, but by something dragging. Years later, hikers found a message carved into the underside of a fallen log near the site. "The hour comes again. I'm not alone this time." The handwriting matched Clara's original script before the change. Black Salt Holler was a dead place, even before the murders. Locals say the land never healed after the coal veins dried out. Trees grew twisted, livestock wouldn't breed, and anyone who stayed too long began to hear the same thing, a whisper under the earth, not wind, not rats, something deeper, something older. In 1869, a preacher named Elias Finch came to the holler with his 5 children. He bought the old Macready homestead, abandoned since 1842, when the entire Macready family was found hanging from their root cellar rafters in an apparent group suicide. Locals begged Elias to leave it be, but he claimed God had given him a mission to cleanse the valley of sin. But what he found instead was something waiting for him. It started with salt, pure black grains of it, coarse and sharp, seeping up through the floorboards like sweat. Elias collected it, burned it, prayed over it, but it kept returning, always in the same symbol, a 7-pointed star with its tips bent inward. Then his youngest daughter began speaking in tongues. She'd stand in the yard at midnight, barefoot, chanting in a voice that didn't belong to a child. Her eyes rolled white, her tongue forked, literally split down the center, a clean wound that never bled. Elias, desperate, declared the house cursed and planned to burn it to the ground. But on the night he lit the torch, the neighbors saw the impossible. The flame reversed, crawling down the matchstick and burning the preacher's hand inward like wax retreating from a candle. That night he gathered his children and performed what he called the binding. Using his own blood and the black salt, he carved 7 names into the walls. Not the names of his children, but something else, something unpronounceable. Only 2 of the children survived. They ran barefoot through 6 miles of woodland to the neighboring town of Withers Grove, dehydrate, dead and raving. When they were finally calmed, they told the sheriff the same story. "Papa made us take the oath." But it wasn't to God anymore. When officials returned to the homestead, the house was gone. Not burned, not destroyed. Gone. The land where it stood was nothing but a crater of salt and teeth. To this day, nothing grows in Black Salt Holler. No birds fly overhead, and on cold, moonless nights, locals claim you can still hear a child's voice whispering in the trees. "We remember the oath, and we're still bound." There is no chapel in Ashford County, at least not one you can find on a map. Ask around, and most folks will tell you the same thing, ain't never been one. But then they'll go quiet, eyes narrowing, like they remember something they shouldn't, like a dream they buried. The truth lies beneath the county's oldest graveyard, Lockwood Rest, established in 1788. Its tombstones lean like broken teeth, half swallowed by ivy and time. But beneath plot number 44, beneath 6 feet of dirt and 2 feet of solid limestone, there's a trapdoor that leads to something much older. It was discovered accidentally in 1993 by a pair of teens who broke in on Halloween night. One of them, Noah Trenton, vanished. The other, Miriam Blight, was found days later, naked and babbling, her tongue sewn into the shape of a cross. Miriam never spoke again. But in her hospital room, she drew. Page after page, the same image. A church with no windows, buried beneath layers of bone and ash. Inside it, a congregation of people with no eyes and mouths full of black honey. Those pages were dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations until 2007, when a geological survey accidentally mapped a void directly beneath Lockwood Rest, roughly the size of a small church, a stone structure, unregistered, unmarked. A private team of researchers attempted excavation. They got as far as exposing a sliver of foundation before the project was halted. Why? Because the moment the soil was cracked open, every clock in Ashford County stopped for 6 minutes. Phones froze, pacemakers stalled, one man died mid-breath. A child was born, silent and breathless, and then let out a scream 6 minutes later with teeth already formed in her gums. The dig was buried, literally, covered over, paid off, forgotten. But the whispers didn't stop. A priest from out of state tried to bless the land in 2011. He collapsed after reciting Psalm 23, claiming he heard an echo of the Lord, but in reverse. His final words before falling into a coma were, "The church below still sings, but it is not the song of God." Noah Trenton's body was never found, but in 2021, a groundskeeper discovered a fresh note tucked inside plot number 44, written in rust-colored ink and dated that very day. It read, "Service begins at midnight. Dress in silence. Come hungry. Mercy Hill Hospital closed in 1982. The official story: asbestos, a building too old to save, condemned, sealed, left to rot. But ask anyone who lived in Marin County before the shutdown, and they'll tell you something different, something they don't say out loud unless the lights are on and the doors are locked. They'll tell you about the skin room. It started with the basement. Patients complained of strange noises coming through the floor at night, wet dragging, whispering in a language no one recognized, and something that sounded like a saw, but slower, more deliberate, hungrier. Then came the disappearances. Between 1979 and 1981, 11 patients and 3 nurses vanished from Mercy Hill, always at night. No signs of struggle, just empty beds and the smell of antiseptic mixed with something coppery and sweet. When Nurse Geraldine Black went missing in the fall of '81, an orderly named Craig Arlen went looking for her. He broke hospital protocol and followed the noises down to the lower levels, the sub-basement, a place not listed on any blueprints. He found a door. It was covered in human skin, stitched together in patchwork, some pieces tattooed, others scarred. In the center, someone had nailed a placard made of jawbone with a single word etched into it: ossuary. Craig opened the door. He didn't scream, he didn't run, he just walked inside and closed it behind him. When the hospital staff realized he was missing, they called the police. An investigation was launched. They found no records of a sub-basement. The stairwell Craig allegedly used led to a bricked wall, and no one could figure out how a door made of skin could exist in a hospital that had supposedly passed inspection 6 months prior. The hospital was shuttered 1 month later. But here's the part they really don't want you to know. In 2015, urban explorers broke into Mercy Hill. On of them, Anna Renshaw live-streamed her descent into the ruins. For 43 minutes, viewers watched her wander the decaying halls. Then her camera went black. When police arrived 2 days later, they found her phone, cracked, still recording. The last 10 seconds, a close-up of a wall with skin stretched across it like canvas, and a human eye blinking from beneath. No one's gone back since. But the hospital still stands, quiet, waiting. And sometimes, just sometimes, people say they hear the lullaby of Mercy Hill drifting through the trees. It has no words, only humming, and the sound of something being peeled. Fairhope is a picturesque southern town, porches, oak trees, lemonade summers, but there's a stretch of land near the bay where the trees don't grow right, where even dogs refuse to walk. They call it Shadow's End. Most folks don't remember why. But in the summer of 1952, something happened there, something they tried to erase. It started with a group of children, 11 of them, all from the same school, all part of the same summer reading group. Miss Evelyn Judd, the town librarian, held weekly storytime sessions under the pavilion at Shadow's End. It was supposed to be innocent, fairy tales, snacks, the occasional arts and crafts. But the books changed. Instead of Little Red Riding Hood, Miss Judd began reading from a black-bound volume with no title. It smelled like dirt and iron, and no one remembered where it came from. The stories were strange, not quite horror, not quite myth, but filled with things that slithered between words, stories about eyes growing on trees and shadows that whispered your name if you stood too long in the dark. The children became different. They stopped eating. Not food, anyway. Neighbors said they saw them crouched near fences and alleyways at dusk, scooping up shadows with their hands and licking their fingers afterward. One mother caught her daughter trying to peel the dark off the living room wall with a butter knife. Another found her son feeding something under his bed that mewed like a kitten but smelled like burned sugar and ammonia. By the third week, 3 children were missing. When confronted, Miss Judd insisted they had moved. The stories called them back, she said. The old ones need readers. The townsfolk burned the pavilion. They say Miss Judd never screamed, she just laughed, even as the flames took her, even as her voice grew into something inhuman, like someone reading backwards through broken teeth. No bodies were found. Not hers. Not the missing children. The book was never recovered. But Shadow's End remains. And sometimes, on a moonless night, if you stand in the center of the field and hold your breath, you'll feel something tugging at your feet. And if you listen closely, you might hear the sound of pages turning in the dark. They say the children still read wherever they are. And they're always looking for someone new to read with them. White Elk was never meant to be a town. It began as a seasonal farming camp in the early 1900s, nestled in the valley near the Bitterroot Range. The soil was rich, the wheat tall, and the winters deadly, but the locals swore the land was cursed long before the first plow touched it. They said it had to be fed. Every autumn, just before the first frost, strange teeth would grow from the ground. Not bones, teeth, human-sized, yellowed, some with fillings, others razor-sharp like a predator's. They pushed up through the soil like weeds, sprouting where the harvest was heaviest. The farmers called them harvest teeth. They tried to dig them up, but the ground would scream. No one talked about that part. The elders said it was payment, a tithe for the abundance, a relic of something ancient buried beneath the valley. Let it chew, they said. Let it feast, or we all go hungry. In 1921, a new family arrived, the Krantz family, fresh from Chicago, looking to start over. They mocked the superstitions, plowed deep into the fields, and cleared hundreds of the teeth. That year, the crops doubled. But so did the dead animals, dogs disemboweled, livestock skinned from the inside out. At night, the Krantz children began sleepwalking, straight into the fields, barefoot, their mouths filled with dirt and tooth shards. Mrs. Krantz begged the town for help. They told her to return the teeth. She didn't listen. On the night of the harvest moon, all 5 Krantzes were found in their barn, arranged in a perfect circle, each with their jaws dislocated, mouths packed with wheat and molars. There were bite marks on the inside of their stomachs. After that, no one cleared the teeth again. Modern White Elk is small, quiet, no gas station, 1 diner, but the wheat's still good. Every fall the ground hums low and the teeth bloom again. And sometimes, just sometimes, tourists go missing on their Instagram walks through the amber fields. The locals just shrug. Bad footing, they say. Watch your step. Because in White Elk, you don't harvest without being harvested. And if you listen closely when the wind sweeps through the valley, you can hear a crunching beneath the soil. The land is still chewing. Cape Braith, Newfoundland. Foggy cliffs, violent seas. A lighthouse so old the stones beneath it predate the settlers, the kind of place that shouldn't exist anymore. But somehow it still stands because something inside won't let it fall. They called it the Screaming Light. It wasn't because of the beam or the siren. It was because of the sound it made at night, when no one was manning it. A deep, human scream echoing across the water, full of pain and rage. Not a malfunction, not the wind. A scream that came from within the walls themselves. First reported in 1876, when lighthouse keeper Evan Mallory wrote in his log, "The light cries out at 2:13 a.m. precisely, always the same hour. I locked the doors, I held the key, but I heard breathing behind me." Mallory hanged himself from the beacon after 6 months. Every keeper after him lasted less and less. 3 weeks, 9 days. One man lasted just 2 hours. He ran into the freezing Atlantic and was found days later on the rocks, teeth shattered, whispering, "It dreams in stone." In 1904, a team of engineers tried to automate the lighthouse. During excavation, they uncovered something beneath the foundation, a pit of teeth and human femurs, arranged in a perfect spiral, circling a small stone tablet etched in an unknown language. The lead engineer took a chisel to it. That night, the lighthouse screamed without stopping for 8 straight hours. Windows shattered in nearby homes. 2 babies were born without eardrums. The engineers were never seen again. Since then, no one lives in Cape Braith. The town is abandoned. The road leading up to the lighthouse is overgrown, and do not approach signs line the cliffside. But the light still turns. Every night, 2:13 a.m. A drone crew tried to film it in 2021. The footage cut out mid-recording, but their audio survived. A voice, raspy, layered, and not quite hike. Man says, "Do not wake the lantern, it keeps the tide fed." Locals say if you listen to the water near the cliffs, you can hear the lighthouse breathing, inhaling mist, exhaling sorrow. And when ships go missing in the North Atlantic, some say they were simply called home, into the mouth of something older than the sea itself. It started on a Monday. The church bell rang at dawn, loud, urgent, frantic. But no one had pulled the rope. The priest, Father Lennox, swore he'd locked the bell tower the night before. No wind, no birds, no explanation. The town of Andover, Maine, gathered in the square, staring up at the tower. The bell was still, but the sound was deafening, and then it kept ringing, for 3 days straight, non-stop, a single repeating note. Even after the town blacksmith climbed up and cut the bell's clapper off with a saw. The sound didn't stop. On the 4th day, windows began to crack. Livestock bled from the ears. A boy named Milo was found curled in a cellar, sobbing blood, whispering, "The bell calls for debt." Locals abandoned the town. The mayor filed an emergency request with the diocese, begging for exorcists. Rome refused, citing unauthorized claims of divine interference. So the townspeople took matters into their own hands. They burned the church to the ground. But the ringing didn't stop. For another 7 days, the sound continued, from nothing. No bell, no tower, just a ringing, now coming from inside people's homes. The sound began to follow them. Survivors who fled Andover claimed it showed up in their dreams. Their ears rang until they coughed blood. Some said the bell wasn't a bell at all. It was a name. A forgotten word of summoning, forged in iron and bound in sin. And once spoken, it echoed forever. Historians uncovered a disturbing link. In 1766, a bell was cast from melted shackles taken from a slave ship that ran aground near Andover. It was said to be cursed, blessed with the final breath of the enslaved trapped in iron. They called it the mourner's cry. That bell was lost during a storm, but it was found again in 1891 and melted into the very bell that rang the town awake. No one in Andover speaks of it now. The town was renamed. Martyrs were redrawn. But sometimes, when the fog rolls through Maine's forests, hikers stop cold in their tracks because they hear a single bell ring, loud and low, echoing off the trees. And it doesn't fade. It follows. She was beautiful, but you couldn't meet her gaze for long. Eyes too sharp, smile too restrained, like she knew something you didn't. The portrait hung in the Tremblay residence, a French Creole manor in the Garden District of New Orleans. Painted in 1841, it was of Evangeline Tremblay, the daughter of a sugar baron who died suddenly at the age of 23. No one knew how. No illness, no wound, just lifeless. One morning, her face fixed in that same eerie smile seen in the painting. They buried her and sealed the family tomb tight. But that portrait, it stayed. And in 1919, strange things began. First, the smile changed. It widened, just slightly. A smirk. Then her eyes turned to the left, as though watching something out of frame. 2 weeks later, the background began to shift. At first it looked like fog, then like figures, barely visible, almost erased. And then her dress changed color. The family matriarch, Colette Tremblay, was the first to say it aloud. The portrait is repainting itself. They tried to remove it, but the hooks embedded in the wall refused to pull free. 4 men couldn't lift it. A maid who tried to cover it with a sheet was thrown across the room, her nose broken, her eyes bleeding. Then came the visits. Evangeline was seen walking past mirrors, brushing her hair at night in rooms no one had entered, sitting at the piano bench as soft notes filled the darkened hall. In November, her niece Lucienne began sleepwalking. Each time she stood in front of the painting whispering, "She's not finished yet." An art historian from Tulane was called. He examined the canvas, and what he found was chilling. Beneath the oil was another layer, a face scratched out. Not Evangeline. Someone else, terrified, mouth open, as if screaming. Records revealed a lost truth. The original painting was not of Evangeline at all. It was of her handmaid, Claudie, who had mysteriously vanished just weeks before Evangeline's sudden death. Rumors whispered that Evangeline practiced voodoo, not the kind tourists think of, the old kind, the kind where you could trap a soul in canvas. When the manor burned in 1921, the only item that survived the flames was the portrait, untouched, perfectly intact. Today, it's kept in a private collection. Collectors say the paint never dries. And if you stare long enough, you'll see your own reflection, smiling back. The schedule said track 7 was empty. No departures. No arrivals. But at exactly 3:13 a.m., on a fog-choked October night in 1943, a train pulled into Philadelphia's 30th Street station. A locomotive with no known route, no listed passengers, no conductor, only the number 1133 etched into the front. The station master, Bernard Mallory, heard the screech of steel and ran out onto the platform, expecting a delivery mistake, maybe a freight redirect. But what he saw wasn't cargo. It was a passenger train, an old one. Black enamel faded, gold trim tarnished, the kind they hadn't used since before the war. The doors hissed open. No one stepped out. So Mallory did what anyone would do. He boarded it. Inside he found passengers, sitting perfectly still, their eyes wide open, unblinking, unmoving. They weren't statues, they were real, but their skin was ashen, their bodies cold. Each wore 19th century clothing, bonneted women, men in stovepipe hats, children clutching dolls made of corn husks. He backed out slowly and called security. When they arrived, the train was gone. No sound, no steam, no trail, just empty rails. The incident was marked as unverified, until 3 more workers reported the exact same event, down to the minute, over the next 3 nights. Always at 3:13 a.m., always track 7. The government got involved. Military personnel came to observe on the 4th night. They blocked off the platform, waited with loaded weapons. 3:13 came. The train appeared. Cameras jammed. Watches stopped. The platform lights flickered as it pulled in again, exactly the same. Train 1WM33. This time, a soldier entered and didn't come back. When 2 more followed, only one returned, sobbing, unable to speak. Later, they found a piece of parchment folded in his jacket, a manifest list, names, dates. One stood out, Mallory, Bernard, departed 1943, but Bernard was still alive, shaking, sick, hospitalized since the first night. The military sealed the files, but an intern at the War Department leaked part of a report. It stated the train seemed to operate on non-linear time principles, perhaps caught in a temporal echo, a loop of lost souls traveling between death and something else. The final note read, Train 1133 does not follow tracks, it follows grief. Track 7 was decommissioned in 1954, but some station staff still hear whistles at 3:13. And if you walk past the old terminal windows at night, you might glimpse a train, waiting, and if it opens for you, don't get on. There's a tape. No label, no station ID, no timestamp, just static, and then a voice. It was found in 1988 in a dusty pawnshop in Twin Falls, Idaho, tucked behind a stack of old ham radios. A college student named Darren Miskell bought it for $1, intrigued by the handwritten words on the cassette, "Play me when alone." He did. At first it sounded like a typical late-night broadcast. Crackling AM interference, a low voice, calm, too calm, but then it said his name. "Darren, you have 3,494 days left." He laughed, thinking it was some bizarre prank. But the next few minutes listed facts no one should know: his middle name, his childhood dog's nickname, the time his grandmother died, right down to the minute. And then it began to list other people. Names, dates, times. One after another, it read off people in Darren's life. His roommate, his high school girlfriend, his mother. Each entry followed by a specific countdown. Freaked out, he shut it off. When he played it again for friends, the tape changed. The voice said their names, their countdowns. Every time, the broadcast was different, tailored, intimate, surgical. And the most horrifying part, each countdown matched the actual date the person died. Darren's roommate. Accident. Exactly 128 days later. His girlfriend. Cancer within the year. A professor. Heart failure. Exactly on schedule. Local radio techs examined the cassette. No anomalies. No special recording equipment. Just one strange property. You could only hear your own list. Every person who listened heard names they recognized. Every death accurate. No exceptions. Word got out. Soon, a small wave of curious listeners swept the town. People lined up to hear the voice. Some tried to use the dates to change fate, to warn, to act, to prevent. But it never worked. One man chained himself in his basement, determined to outlive the countdown. He died on schedule. An undiagnosed aneurysm burst at the precise second the voice had said. In 1992, the tape was confiscated by the Idaho State Police after a string of suicides. But a bootleg version started circulating online in the 2000s. It's said to still exist, buried in deep forums and file shares. Now digitized, disguised as old jazz radio files. If you find it, and you listen, the voice will know you. It always starts the same way. "Hello, you are alone now. Let's begin." The monks of St. Gallen Abbey were known for silence. Vows of quiet devotion, prayer, and stillness. But in 1804, the silence was broken, not by song or sermon, but by something far older. It began with a tremor. One cold April morning, the abbey's east wing shook slightly, just enough to dislodge a slab in the floor of the crypt. A monk, Brother Matthias, was first to descend and investigate. What he found was a cavity not listed in any records. A sealed ossuary filled wall to wall with bones. But these weren't ordinary remains. The skulls were etched. Each one bore markings, ancient symbols not in Latin or Greek, but something predating them both. Spirals, eyes, claws, and on every skull's forehead, carved deeply, a phrase in a dead tongue. The abbot ordered the room sealed. Forbidden to speak of it, the monks were threatened with excommunication if they returned. But the whispering started that night. Soft voices drifted from beneath the stone. Not prayers, not chants, but something more guttural, hissing consonants, wet vowels, as if the bones themselves were breathing secrets into the air. Brother Matthias became obsessed. He began sleeping beside the sealed door, scribbling feverishly into his diary, pages and pages of what he called translations. He claimed the voices belonged to the 9 buried teachers, ancient priests from before time. Men who had discovered the true syllables of God and were punished for speaking them aloud. He said they were waiting to be heard again. Soon, other monks began to change. Quiet men became agitated. They walked in circles at night, reciting strange syllables. Some clawed scripture into the walls with their fingernails. One monk, Brother Henrik, tore out his tongue and wrote, Too many voices for one mind. Silence is a lie. When a traveler, a French historian named Arnaud Giraud, attempted to document the events, he vanished. His journal was found in the confessional booth. Its last page read, "I heard them. They are not dead. They are only patient." In June 1804, the Vatican quietly dispatched a team of archivists and sealed the eastern crypt entirely. They claimed it was due to structural instability, but a papal letter, uncovered centuries later, described it differently. The whispering chamber has been bound with the right of unlistening. No prayers are to be said in its vicinity. Sound must not be encouraged. Silence is now a safeguard. To this day, the east wing of St. Gallen remains off-limits. But sometimes, if you press your ear to the cold stone, you'll hear it, like teeth clicking, like tongues forming the name you were given before birth. They buried her once. That should have been enough. Her name was Clara Bell, age 14, freckles like ash across her cheeks, always seen with a red ribbon in her hair. In the summer of 1963, she disappeared from her family's lake house near Stillwater, Maine. Her parents said she'd gone out to swim and never came back. 3 days later, her body washed up downstream, face pale, limbs stiff, eyes wide open as if they'd never closed to begin with. She was declared dead. Cause, drowning. The body was buried. Closed casket. Then a week passed, and Clara came home, knocking lightly on the door at midnight, dripping, muddy, silent. Her mother fainted. Her father stood frozen. Clara didn't speak, just walked in, sat at the kitchen table and began eating cold peas from the fridge like nothing had changed, as if death had been a minor inconvenience. Doctors examined her. Her pulse was strong, her eyes responsive, her fingerprints matched, but something was wrong. She didn't blink when loud noises startled her. She didn't sleep. She didn't speak for 3 days. When she finally did, it was a whisper. "The water let me go. It still wants something." The town was panicked. The Reverend called her a reverse Lazarus. The local paper published the story but pulled it the next day without explanation. Then came the second drowning. Clara was found again in the same lake, 11 days after she'd returned. This time her body was different. Swollen, bloated, eyes clouded with algae. But this time, she held something in her hand. A bone. Human. Small. Too small for an adult. They buried her again. This time with police watching over the casket. Her grave was sealed with cement. A local priest blessed the soil twice. A warning more than a prayer. But fishermen swear they've seen her, standing ankle-deep in the water at dawn, wearing her red ribbon, face expressionless, always wear her ching, never blinking. Some say she never left. Others whisper she's still waiting because the lake didn't give her back freely. It made a trade. And somewhere out there, another girl's name was taken. Another soul marked for drowning. Because Clara didn't come back alone. She came back in place of something else.